Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us this week. For Coffee Talk, we have Ron Henderson. He is with the USS North Carolina and is going to be giving us a presentation about it. So I will turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. I'm going to be sharing my screen now, and we'll do that, and we'll do that. And Rachel, confirm for me that you do have the full screen there on the...
Yes, sir. It looks good.
Okay, all right, great. So I'll talk to you a little bit about the Battleship today. I'll tell you a little bit about myself later, but the most important thing to remember about the Battleship is that, and hang on a second, I'm having some technical difficulties. One second. Most important thing to remember about the Battleship in North Carolina is that it is the state of North Carolina's World War II memorial. It is the memorial to the over 10,000, almost 11,000 North Carolinians who perished in World War II. So it is the state's World War II memorial, not just for the Navy or for sailors, or but for all the services: Army, Navy, Army Air Corps. There was no Air Force in those days. Marine Corps, Coast Guard, Merchant Marine. So that's its most important feature, and I hope if you remember nothing else today, you'll remember that. North Carolina was the first of the modern fast battleships. She was, and we say that because the modern fast battleships were fast enough to keep up with the aircraft carriers, which in World War II became the centerpiece of our naval forces. And the older battleships that had been built during World War I and shortly thereafter were just not fast enough to keep up with the aircraft carriers. So that's what distinguishes the modern ones. North Carolina was the first one of those. She was the first battleship that the United States had built in 16 years. There had been an international arms treaty which had limited battleship construction. It was an attempt to reduce the likelihood of war and reduce the severity of war should it break out. It was unsuccessful, of course, but it did result in the United States not building any battleships at all for 16 years. So she was the first, and that her keel was laid in 1937. So construction began in 1937. She was floated out in 1940 and commissioned 80 years ago. 80 years ago. Let's see, what's today? Today's the 8th. She was commissioned 80 years ago tomorrow, on the 9th of April, 1941. And there were two ships in her class. The North Carolina was the class leader, and then her sister ship, Washington. North Carolina was built in Brooklyn Navy Yard, New York. Washington was constructed in the Philadelphia Navy Yard at approximately the same time. We were probably a month ahead of the Washington. The ships are identical, really, and Washington herself was a great ship in World War II, had a great war record, and we like to and sadly she no longer exists. We like to think at the Battleship that we're also a memorial to the USS Washington. Commissioned, as I said, in April 1941, served throughout World War II in the Pacific, and after the war served as a midshipman training vessel for a short period of time, and then was decommissioned in 1947. She was laid up in the storage yard in Bayonne, New Jersey, and there she sat until she was brought to Wilmington. We'll talk about that in a second. She had a terrific war record, 15 battle stars, most decorated battleship of World War II. She shares that honor with her sister, the Washington. Of course, the Washington does not survive. So more accurately, perhaps we should say the most decorated surviving battleship of World War II. And this is a photo of her coming down the Cape Fear River in October 1961, 60 years ago. She was towed down from Bayonne, New Jersey. You can see she was brought up the river. This was before the Memorial Bridge was even built. They had dredged out this area on the west side of the Cape Fear River. You can see the tugs are pushing the ship into that. And you can see the customs, what was then called the customs house. I believe today they call it the Federal Building. You can see all the people out on the front of the Federal Building. And if you look real closely, you can see the floating restaurant, the Ark. Here, maybe my cursor can point that out to you. There she is there. We had asked, our folks had asked the owner of the Ark to move the ship so that, reduce the risk of her obstructing North Carolina getting into her final spot. And the owner either refused to do so or refused to do so without being paid. But in any case, he didn't move. And sure enough, when the Battleship North Carolina was swung into her berth, her stern tapped the Ark and left a big dent in it. Didn't even scratch the paint on the North Carolina. The Ark still exists today. She's in Florida as a floating office building. And she has a Purple Heart painted on the spot where she was smacked by the North Carolina. So that's kind of interesting. My name is Ron Henderson. I spent 34 years in the Navy. I'm a naval aviator, a pilot. I flew jet fighters from aircraft carriers, the F-18 Hornet. Later on, I was very fortunate to be selected to command a ship, and that's me on the bridge of the USS Juneau, an amphibious assault ship. And later I went on to command the USS John F. Kennedy. So I know something about being the captain of a Navy ship. I'm on the board of the Friends of the Battleship North Carolina, and I run the tour guide docent training program there. So if any of you are interested in volunteering on the Battleship North Carolina, you now know a guy, and I hope you will join our merry crew of people who work on the ship to keep her in good material condition, as well as giving tours and serving as docents for the thousands of visitors we have every year. If you have questions while I'm speaking, because of my screen limitations, I can't see your faces right now. But if you do have a question, go ahead and unmute yourself and just ask your question. So I'll stop right now and say, are there any questions before I press on?
Looks like we're good. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So today we're not going to spend too much time on the history of the Battleship North Carolina. I can do that at a later date if you'd like. What I was asked to do was to talk about what's kind of going on with the ship today. And the biggest thing we have going on has been this hull repair project. And it's cost a lot of money. It's been many years of work and fundraising. The ship managed to raise, you got to understand the ship is not federally, state, or local government funded. It's entirely self-sustaining. Admission sales address our operating budget, but for capital projects we need to raise money, and we raised over $20 million to build the cofferdam, which is basically the barrier that goes around the ship now that keep the water out so that we can get at the hull and make repairs. We bid on this, and the problem is this, that the ship has been sitting in the Cape Fear River for 60 years. And that water is slightly salty. The term is brackish. The salt water coming up from the ocean and the fresh water coming down from the Fayetteville area meet here in Wilmington. So it's kind of semi-salty water, and salt water and steel don't mix very well. So the hull has corroded. It has rusted away and deteriorated over the last 60 years. So we knew we had to do something. We want this battleship to exist 100 years from now for our descendants to enjoy. So we knew we needed to do something. So we put out some bids, and we actually have bid out the first proposal, which is the bow repairs. We have some follow-on work that we will do in future years as we raise the money to do so. But the area we concentrated on was the bow, because that's where the corrosion was the worst. The stern of the ship, the back end of the ship, kind of sits in the mud, and the mud does a pretty good job of keeping that salt water away from the steel. But up on the bow, that's not the case. So the bow was quite vulnerable. We did raise money after building the cofferdam. We had to raise money now for the steel repairs, and we were able to raise $2.5 million through our Generations campaign, and also we did get some state grants from the North Carolina Department of Natural Resources. The contract period you can see there, and it has been extended a few months, so it's really still going on. And this is what we started with. You can see the corrosion there. You can see how nasty it looks below the black paint. As we stripped away some of the paint and the top coats, we found, significant damage. This is what it looked like before the work started, and clearly we needed to do something. Here you can see the workers actually cutting the steel away and getting at some of the interior frames of the ship. These are spaces that human beings hadn't been in over 60 years. So it's kind of interesting to go into these spaces once they were opened up and they were safe to enter. And you can see the corrosion. And we had workers here just doing a great job of removing the bad steel and replacing it with good steel. Here you can see they've put in some, these are steel sort of timbers that are to reinforce the hull so it doesn't collapse in on itself, that have been installed. And then they put the final product, the finished steel, on the outside, and then of course you have to paint it. And there were challenges to the project. We had, hurricanes, we had a lot of flooding events with big storms, so there were setbacks, but that was built into the plan. And as you can see, it certainly looks a lot better there now than it did before we started. Here's a picture of the project almost complete. This picture was taken 2 months ago, and you can see that they're working backwards, and they will stop at the red line. The red line is where the armor belt of the ship begins. So we will stop there, do a little repairs on the other side of the ship, and then examine options in the future for perhaps doing more of this work on the stern. The steel is kind of an interesting story. The steel is made by a company called Nucor, which is based in North Carolina. So this is American steel. It would kind of be sacrilegious to put Chinese steel in an American battleship, wouldn't it? So definitely North Carolina steel. And I have to tell you, Nucor donated the steel to us. That's their way of supporting the Battleship North Carolina. A really significant donation to the ship. And you can see the dimensions of it. It's 1/2 inch thick steel. It's the kind that is appropriate for shipbuilding. And you can see it was delivered in those 10 by 40 sheets there, and is primed and treated so that we should get many years of service out of this steel. And here's the companies that were all part of this. Atlantic Marine was the Atlantic Coast Industrial was the general contractor, and they subcontracted a lot of this work out. You can see the architects, engineers, and I misidentified earlier. I said cultural. I didn't give you the right title. We're also supported by the North Carolina Department of Natural and Cultural Resources, which is kind of our boss. We do belong to the state of North Carolina. So that's the Department of State Government that we come under. So that's the steel repair project. Any questions about that? Okay, I will press on then with living with water. This is another project we have. One of the big problems we have at the Battleship is flooding. When we get the moon in the right phase, so the tides are high, and then we get a lot of rain, we often flood the parking lot, and if you've ever visited the Battleship during that period of time, you know what I'm talking about. It's a real problem, and you know, climate change, if sea levels do rise even a little bit, it will very much affect the Battleship. So we're concerned about that. So we came up with this idea of living with water, a future project. How do we live with this water, this force of nature, which is sort of attacking the Battleship? And we got a whole bunch of grants. You can see them listed there to give us the funding to do it. And we're going to basically raise the parking lot's elevation, but then we're going to do something really interesting. We're going to construct wetlands that will have a capacity to absorb high water, as you'll see in just a second, and then construct a living shoreline around the park. We're pretty much in final design phase now. This is what it would look like. You can see that we're basically going to build a riverbed, a dry riverbed, through the middle of the parking lot. You know, we only use this part of the parking lot anyway. The parking lot today is out in this green area. So what we're going to do is take that portion of the parking lot and build a dry riverbed through it, which will be sort of a shock absorber for high water. Then we'll also groom the shoreline, make it a true living shoreline that is environmentally friendly to alligators and waterfowl and water and fish and things like that that inhabit the river. We'll build a new dock over here so that we can engage the ferries that come across from Wilmington across the river to visit the Battleship. And so that's our plan. Living with water. I think it'll be really neat. It's currently in design phase. I can't tell you when construction on this will start, but I can tell you that we do have the money for it. So I think it's just a matter of getting, you know, all the permits and the environmental impact statements and things like that before we proceed onward. So look for this in the next couple of years at the Battleship. We're doing some other things. We have to repair the mast. You know, if you think about it, the mast of the ship, the top part, sticks up into the air, and it's constantly being windblown and constantly being deluged with water. So we really needed to do something to preserve those upper masts. And we did get a grant from the National Park Service to do that. And we're trying to use the hull repair contract as a contract vehicle to take advantage of the workmen that are already there, and also their massive cranes, because you're going to need a big crane to get up onto the mast. The design is complete, and we're just waiting some approvals before we get started on the work. And I'll show you what this is going to look like. This is the part of the ship I'm talking about. The mast, you can see the radar dish, and you all probably haven't been up there, but I have, and that's exactly what it looks like up there. You can see the corrosion around the mast, and it's kind of rickety structure now because it is so exposed to the weather. So we're gonna try to take care of that. The Teak Deck is of great interest to people when they come aboard the ship. The deck you see on the Battleship right now is not the original deck. The original deck is gone, and you gotta, you know, people ask, well, why teak on a Battleship deck? Well, first off, teak is traditionally used in boats and ships for decking material, and the reason it's used is that teak is, number one, very weather resistant. It's a great sound insulator and also a thermal insulator. That is, it serves as a heat shield and keeps that bright sun from heating up the decks below it. So it's a good insulator. It has another property that's advantageous in a warship, and that is that it doesn't really splinter if it were to be impacted. It does splinter, but the splinters are very small. Unlike oak, for example, if this deck were made of oak wood, the splinters that would come from an impact could be, very seriously threatening to your life as they fly through the air. Teak doesn't do that. So it's a sort of a battle damage control as well. Now, the Teak deck that you see here on the ship was actually donated to the ship by the government of Burma back in the early 2000s. That country is now called Myanmar. In fact, there's really only two, well, not the only, but the main producers of teak in the world right now are Burma and Brazil. And the government of Burma was trying to improve its relations with the United States, so they said, well, we'll donate $250,000 worth of teak to the Battleship North Carolina, and that's how we had our deck replaced. And we spent a lot of time maintaining the deck. One bad thing about teak is it does require pretty constant maintenance, and so we do have some staff that do that work. But frankly, what we've had to do historically is contract out to a company in Florida to come up, and about $50,000 a year to have them refurbish and repair our deck. Well, one of the things we've done is we've gotten that company in Florida to teach a local contractor how to do it. And as a result, we can now do this using local contractors at about half the price. So we're talking $24,000 instead of $50,000. So they started this work back in November, and it says finish no later than, my notes say finish no later than March, but in fact, they're still working on the deck, and they're almost finished. But if you go aboard the ship today, you'll see the deck is in beautiful shape. So any questions about some of the projects that are going on, the steel repair, the living with water, the mast, and the teak replacement? All right, Rachel, not hearing any questions. I'm gonna.
Yeah, I've got one for you.
Oh, sure.
So about how long, I know you had a timeline for one of those projects, but about how long do these typically take?
Well, it depends on the project. The teak repair takes a company working, 5 days a week, probably 2 or 3 months. Very dependent on weather. As you know,
Sure.
living here, we get big storms sometimes, and you can't do any work then. The mast repair is very dependent on winds, because if you have really high winds, you can't put the big cranes up that you need to repair the mast. But the mast is I'll go back to that. The mast is, oops, sorry, I went the wrong way. The mast is a relatively small area. So that I don't think would take that long. It's just that it's difficult to get to. So you're sort of stuck with, the availability of cranes and low winds. I mean, you're 150 feet above the water at this point, so it needs a big crane to get up there. So that's the real deciding factor there.
Awesome.
Hopefully
Yeah.
I answered
Are
your
there
question.
any of these projects that you're particularly looking forward to having complete?
I think, well, we're all happy with the ongoing maintenance of the deck. We don't really see the mast. I mean, I understand we have to fix it, but it doesn't impact visitors that much. But I think living with water is going to be really a neat thing. It's going to really increase the appeal of that entire area around the ship. Not to mention keep the parking lot dry when it rains. So I'm looking forward to that. Yeah.
Yeah, that looks like it's going to be really, really beautiful when it's done.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I'd like to do now is talk about, okay, well, what are we doing right now, and how did COVID affect us? So as you know, the Battleship was closed to visitors when the COVID lockdown began, I guess in mid to late March of last year. And most of the staff was staying home, working from home as best they could. We did have guys on the ship because, there's maintenance that has to be done. You have to, there's just routine functions that have to be done. But we kept a minimal staff. We opened back up. Let's see, when did we open back up? We opened back up this fall, and I believe around September, October timeframe, but with limited visitation. You could go on board, but main deck only, and the times were a little bit restricted. And of course, you had to follow all the CDC protocols, wearing a mask, practicing social distancing, et cetera. And significantly, we as volunteers were not allowed on the ship to give tours or anything like that. There was a fear that we would either give someone COVID, or we would get COVID and be a vector for the disease that way. So that we were, the state didn't want any non-employees on the ship. So that kind of limited what we were able to do. And so then that changed. I want to say about 2 months ago is when we opened the ship completely. That is, the entire ship now is open for visitors, and the volunteers are allowed back on. 1 second, sorry, I have workers right outside my window, and I didn't want them to interrupt us. So volunteers are allowed back on. We've resumed giving tours on the ship, and as we were planning for the reopening, the volunteers said, this year, 2021, is the 60th anniversary of the Showboat, which is the nickname for the ship, arriving in Wilmington. In October of this year, she will have been here in Wilmington for 60 years. It's pretty amazing when you think about it. Not only that, as I already mentioned, tomorrow is her 80th birthday. So she's 80 years old starting in April, and she's been in Wilmington 60 years as of October. So we wanted to recognize that, and of course recognize the contributions of the Battleship North Carolina to the World War II effort, and its place as a memorial to the over 10,000 North Carolinians who gave their lives in World War II. So we wanted to do something special, and we brainstormed this, and we came up with a bunch of ideas. The timeline, as I said, April to October. So a couple things we're going to do. We're going to, on the first weekend of every month, plus a few other holidays, we're going to have a special tour that we give. And the idea here is a short tour that is fully guided by a trained docent, that is informative, but sort of quick. You don't have to buy the whole 3-hour tour and spend all day there. And we call it 6 for 60 because it costs $6, and you get 60 minutes with a tour guide who'll take you around the ship. Basically, go wherever you want to go. Although we have a planned route that we're going to use, but if you want to see something different, you just tell your tour guide. So we're doing that. We're doing the 6 for 60. We also came up with the idea of raising the flag. So we have several, once a month basically throughout the summer, we're going to be having a ceremony where we raise the American flag and have it fly over the Battleship North Carolina, and then people can purchase those flags and they can hoist their own flag up on the North Carolina. And we're getting real good support from the American Legion, the Vietnam veterans, people like that to support us in doing it. It's right down their patriotic alley. So look for that nice souvenir of an American flag that flew over the Battleship North Carolina. And then, of course, the 4th of July activities. The 4th of July is a big event for the Friends of the Battleship. And let me talk about the Friends for just a second. I'm on the board of directors of the Friends of the Battleship. And what we are is we're supporters, and both financially and with our volunteerism, of the Battleship. We're a nonprofit organization. If you donate money to us, you can deduct it from your taxes. And it's a way of providing a funding channel for the ship, as well as produce a group of supporters. If you become a Friends member, which is relatively cheap, you get unlimited access to the ship. You come on board the ship every day if you want for free. You get a 25% discount in the store. But most importantly, and the reason a lot of people join, is the 4th of July activities. We have 4th of July is a Friends member only event on the ship. We everybody brings a cooler and a lawn chair, and we kind of do think of tailgating, except we're on the Battleship. And then when the sun goes down, you have a ringside seat for the fireworks over Wilmington. In fact, the boat shooting the fireworks is not far from the Battleship, so the fireworks are literally going off over your head. It's the best seat in town to watch 4th of July fireworks in Wilmington. So that's kind of our highlight of the summer is 4th of July. Now we're also going to have a kickoff event, and that's happening tomorrow at the Battleship, starting at 10 o'clock, where we're going to kick off this sort of 5 to 6 month worth of commemorative activities with a special ceremony. There'll be press coverage on the ship tomorrow. I'll be there tomorrow. And then we're still in the planning stages for a final event in October commemorating 60 years in the Cape Fear. And we're not sure what that's going to look like. It might be I don't think it'll be a sit-down dinner, but it might be sort of a, heavy hors d'oeuvres and cocktails sort of thing on the fantail of the ship, perhaps with a band playing music as the sun goes down. So that looks like a very special evening in October to commemorate the 60 years that the ship has been here in Wilmington. And of course, think of the great impact that the ship has on the Wilmington economy. It's a tourist attraction for Wilmington, and think of all the the news stations often show the Battleship in the background. One of the stations has a weather station on the Battleship. The Battleship's just an icon for Wilmington and North Carolina, and so I think this will be a great way to celebrate that. So as I said, the finale will be in conjunction with Riverfest in October, and we'll also do things like free tours for veterans and active duty, and you can see the other stuff there that we're doing. So during this entire period of commemoration, we're going to offer free tours for Friends members. So if you're a Friends member, and these will be announced, if you are a member of the Friends, it's a chance to get a free tour. We're going to look for ways to establish outreach for the Battleship, solicit Friends memberships, Friends membership drives, getting people to consider joining the Friends of the Battleship, and we also want to remember the children. It was the school kids who raised their nickels, dimes, and quarters back in the 60s to bring the North Carolina to Wilmington. And we want to do something that recognizes that effort. And you see the other ideas down there. So that's the end of my formal presentation. I will stop sharing. And I will ask if, what questions can I answer for you?
Hi, Ron. This is Cheryl.
Hi, Cheryl.
I don't have a question. I just wanted to tell you that many years ago, I coordinated a national meeting. And so they stayed at the Hilton, and then we contracted with the Battleship, and we had dinner one of the nights on the Battleship. And then they got to tour and they loved it.
Oh yeah, most people do. The Battleship is, of course, it's a lot of fun. I give tours there, and this last Saturday, it's amazing. We had no idea this was going to happen, but with more and more people becoming vaccinated and more things opening up, there's a lot of pent-up demand. I mean, think about it. A lot of people have been cooped up and not able to visit their relatives, their friends, and get outside and do things. And the weather's been nice. Well, last Saturday, the Battleship got slammed. We had over 2,000 visitors on Saturday. Now, that's normally a good day in the summer. Pre-COVID, a Saturday in the summer pre-COVID, we might get 2,000 people. Well, we got 2,000 people, in early April. Uh, so that was just amazing. Every day for the past 2, 3 weeks, we've had very high visitorship. We're opening up more and more stuff. For a while, part of the visitor center was closed off, but now we're opening the rest of it. We're still very concerned with COVID. We follow the CDC guidelines. We certainly don't want anybody catching COVID from the Battleship. But that said, I think there's a great demand for people to get back out there and see the ship, and as I like to phrase it, it's keeping the memory alive. The men who served in World War II, and they were, I got to make the point, they were 99% men. There were women, of course, who perished in World War II. And I'm talking military now. Certainly there were millions of civilian casualties that obviously included women, but very few women in the armed forces in those days. It's different today, but so 99% of the men those who served in World War II were men. And think of what they did. They were 18, 19 years old, and they didn't ask a lot of questions. They were given orders to go serve, and they did. And they came from every part of America. There were Native Americans, there were Black Americans who served, Hispanic Americans, and for many of them, they gave the best part of their lives, and many of them gave their lives. Over 178,000 Americans died in World War II. And if you think about it, they really created the world we enjoy today. They created a world where we have this standard of living that's unprecedented. No people in the history of the planet have lived as well as we do. Do we have problems? Of course we do. But in terms of quality of life, prosperity, it's the most prosperous and comfortable time to be a human being in the history of the world. And we owe a great debt to these people. And sadly, I must tell you that many of our visitors don't get it. I get questions like, who did we fight in World War? They don't even know. So the history isn't being taught, and I think that's a shame. And we're trying to keep the memory alive, the memory of the ship and the men who sailed in her and gave so much for us. And I think if we forget that, then we doom ourselves to perhaps a tougher time in the future. But for now, the ship is a great inspiration to young people, a great inspiration for old people like me to go aboard and think about what it was like back in the day. Kids love it. Kids run up and down the ladders, and I keep joking that one of these days, one of these kids is going to hurt themselves. But thank God we've pretty much childproofed the thing, and we haven't had any serious injuries in a long time. But you're absolutely right, Cheryl. The battle, everyone, I've never seen anyone who came aboard the Battleship who didn't say, "Wow, that was neat," or "How cool is this?" And if you can attend a function on the ship where you're in relative comfort, it's just wonderful. We don't have any dining facilities or kitchen capabilities, so caterers have to bring food in, so that limits us somewhat. But I can think of a few places in Wilmington that are more beautiful than being on the deck of the Battleship North Carolina at sunset on a nice day. So, long answer to a short question. Cheryl or Barbara, do you got anything?
You said you don't have any dining on the ship, but back in the day when the ship was operable, I'm sure you had.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. In fact, think about it. A crew of about 2,000 men. They're eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So there's 6,000 meals right there.
Wow.
Then midnight snack, uh, or what they called mid-rats or midnight rations for the men coming off watch at midnight. There'd usually be, a hamburger or something made for them. So yeah, huge feeder. And by the way, North Carolina, USS North Carolina had a reputation for being a great feeder.
Okay.
Yeah, good food on the battle. It was sort of one of the benefits of being a battleship sailor, because the battleship being a big ship, it could have a big kitchen and lots of supplies and those Navy cooks could
Where was it stationed at
be
most of
creative.
the time in the war?
Well, it wasn't really stationed anywhere, Barbara,
Was it floating?
because of the fluid nature of the war. It was if you think about it, it was a generally slow march across the Pacific, capturing islands, consolidating, then capturing the next set and moving on. She would be pulled off the line into rear areas. As we progressed across the Pacific, we did create rear areas. If you watch the movie South Pacific, you see this stuff, or
Mhm.
Mr. Roberts. But there'd be little secure island chains that were sort of behind the lines, and the ship could go in there, anchor, and take a couple days off, and the men could take turns going ashore, drink a couple beers, swim in the surf, play softball, that sort of thing, anything to get away from the war. And they did do that, but there wasn't any fixed base for her. She left Brooklyn in June of 841, went through the Panama Canal and into the Pacific, and she was nonstop operating until she returned home after the war. The war ended on September 2nd, 1945, and on September 4th, 2 days later, Battleship North Carolina headed east for home. And her first stop, of course, was the Panama Canal. And
Was it ever in Japan?
not she bombarded Japan. She shot her 16-inch guns at the Hitachi factory in Japan.
Okay.
Which, by the way, I gave a tour to some Japanese businessmen a couple of years ago, and they thought that was pretty funny because they worked for Hitachi. But yeah, she did bombard Japan, and of course was involved in all the major battles across the Pacific.
Okay.
So coming home, she went through the Panama Canal, and the first place she stopped in the United States was Boston. And you go, oh, that's kind of weird. Why Boston? Well, because that's where the captain was from. So if it's nice to be king, right?
Ron, if anyone is interested in learning more about volunteer opportunities or ways to get involved, where would you recommend that they go, or who should they contact?
Well, if they go through you, Rachel, you're welcome to forward them to me.
Mhm.
You have my email address, and that's probably a good place to start. Another good place is the volunteer services coordinator at the ship is Kim Sincox. She's been there for 25 years. She's a great point of contact on the ship. Ultimately, we all work for Kim because she is the volunteer coordinator, and they have to go through Kim before I can work with them. She'll interview people and see what they're interested in, but we have we have two ways of volunteering in the ship. One is our maintenance crew, and we call them the Wednesday group because they come in Wednesday mornings, and they drink coffee for a few minutes and then they get to work, and they do fantastic maintenance work on the ship. They'll restore spaces. They do a lot of painting, a lot of chipping of rust. They'll open up a compartment that no one's been in 60 years and go in there and clean it up and make sure there aren't any artifacts in there, historical things. And they love doing it, and they do a great job. And that's for men and women, mostly men, but there's a few women who do it. The people who like to get their hands dirty work with their hands. If you're more of a people person, you can work with me and my docent crew. And the way that works is you go through a training program that I run, and there's a test. You pass the test, and you're a qualified docent. That means you can answer questions, general questions about the ship, and then those that want to be tour guides is an additional qualification. that involves some more practical training, giving practice tours before I'll sign off that you're ready to give tours to the public on your own. But the best way is to go through Kim Sincox on the Battleship to the website, or Rachel, I'm happy if you have people who say they're interested and you want to forward them to me, that's fine.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time this morning to speak with us and give this presentation. It was very informative. I learned a lot, and I know our group did as well. So I appreciate it very much. Thank you as well for your service to this country. And if there's ever anything that we can do for you, please let us know.
Well, I appreciate that. I like to say to people when they say thanks for your service, I say, well, thanks for making it a country worth serving.
We really appreciate you, Ron. Thank you so much for all of your information and your time this morning.
All right. I'll sign off. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Bye now.
So really quick, I know we're almost out of time. I just wanted to briefly touch on the announcement that we made earlier this week with the Senior Resource Center that we are reopening on April 12th, and the Castle Hayne location will be opening a week later on April 19th. Amber made an announcement on Facebook, and a press release and email was sent out as well. So if you haven't had a chance to take a look at that, I would encourage you to take some time and look over that and see all of the details. With the reopening, of course, we'll have some limitations to follow, COVID protocols and keep everybody as safe as possible, but we're really looking forward to seeing you all soon. Yes, Barbara, do you have a question?
Where is the Castle Hayne location?
I'm not too terribly sure what the exact location is. Are you wanting like an address or just kind of a general idea?
No, I was just wondering where it is, because I'm close to the one here in town, so I was just wondering where it was.
Rachel, this is Cheryl.
Mhm.
It is on College Road, North College Road. So if you take College Road past Laney
Oh,
and go, I don't know, maybe a couple of miles past Laney on College,
Mhm.
the church will be on your left.
Thank you, Cheryl. Hopefully that helps a little bit, Barbara. I'm still learning the area.
yes, it does. I know.
Good,
Okay.
good. Well, we are very excited about it. We will be requiring registration for all activities, as well as dining. So make sure, if you haven't already, the phone number to call to let us know that you're interested in registering is 910-798-6450. And you'll just leave a message. Let us know that you are wanting to be registered for the portal to then register for classes.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, we're really looking forward to that. Does anybody have any questions or anything that I can try to answer for you about the reopening?
Rachel, this is Cheryl
Mhm.
again. Do we have to wait until you open on Monday to make that phone call to get to the portal?
No, ma'am. You can go ahead and make that call. We are just asking that you guys are a little patient with us. We are still, developing it all, getting it all ready to go to then send out. So there'll be some information that'll be sent, but you can make that phone call right now and let them know that you want that, and then we will get it plugged in for you. We have to go in and register you, and then you will receive an email.
Thank you.
Of course. Thank you. Well, I am going to go ahead and end our recording now, if that is all right with you guys. Thank you so much for joining us this week. We appreciate it as always.
This is Cheryl again.